Next on our program for the night is the part that I have been most excited about, our keynote address. As we all know, this year's banquet theme revolves around education and the contributions many of our local and regional awardees here tonight have made in the betterment of educational systems. Tonight, our keynote address will take us back over 1,400 years to learn how important education really is in Islam. We'll then fast forward to the early 9th century and touch upon the contribution of Muslims to the system from the early days until today. Our keynote speaker for tonight is Dr. Mohamed Abutaleb, who is the founder of Oak Tree Institute, a leadership academy aimed at developing value-driven, action-focused, result-oriented citizens of tomorrow. Dr. Abutaleb has a joint background as a student of both engineering and Islamic studies. He has studied numerous sciences of the tradition under the tutelage of several teachers and scholars, and has recently completed his PhD at MIT in electrical engineering. He is also co-founder of the Capital Area Islamic Library, one of the first full-function automated Islamic libraries in North America. Without further ado, Dr. Mohamed Abutaleb.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, all praise be to God, and may the peace and blessings of God be upon all His messengers. I cannot begin to express how thrilled and honored I am to be with you tonight, to witness all of this great work and outstanding outreach that we've seen not only in the presentations, but in that social hour before we sat here together tonight. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of the honorees and awardees, because this is really the best of America and the best of the world, what we're seeing here. Each of us reaching out in our own way, educating one another, learning about one another, and growing together. And perhaps that is where I'd like to begin with you tonight, in exploring one of the great universal languages that connects us as human beings, and that is the language of learning. You see, so many of us, we look to one another, and the first thing that we see is what makes us different. We see a different tongue, or a different nationality, or a different gender, or a different age. But the truth is, when you see another only for the things that make you different, it is hard to connect with someone when all you see is differences. What truly brings us together is when we appreciate the great commonality that draws us together, the incredible shared ground on which we can build things of mutual interest, on the values that each of us hold dear for ourselves, our families, our communities, and our country, where we can start working together. I share this with you tonight because education and learning, I would suggest, is perhaps not only one of the languages, but perhaps the greatest language of shared human understanding. Each of us, and especially those of us that are parents, recognize from a very, very early age that infant child, when they simply appreciate the greatness of what it is to see, their eyes grow a little bit wider. Their lips start to furl up, and they explore the world around them. And you see, that feeling is in all of us. We all start there. But not all of us hold on to it throughout our lives. Some of us, it follows us to elementary school, as we learn about far-off places and different people, as we explore our first math equation, or we observe some of the great historical pieces of art, or we look at how societies organize and learn about the social sciences or the language arts. Some people lose that in elementary school. Some people lose it in middle school. Some people lose it in the rush to get the best job and the highest salary as they pursue secondary education and higher education. But a few, actually let me say a many, fortunate amongst us, that love of learning follows us throughout our lives. And so we keep with us the most powerful tool for connecting with another. For Muslims, that journey is not only a human journey, and that experience is not only a human experience, but it is a religious and a spiritual one as well. And allow me to share with you tonight the very first verses, which were mentioned earlier, the first verses of Revelation in the Holy Quran, where it says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read and recite in the name of your Lord who created. خلق الإنسان من علق. He created mankind from a clinging form. اقرأ وربك الأكرم. Recite, and your Lord is most generous and bountiful. الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. The one who taught mankind with the pen taught them that which they did not know. That journey for us in the scripture starts with learning. And actually, as a young person, I remember this being one of the most fascinating parts of the Quran for me, that gave me that desire to probe deeper and explore further. I must share with you that growing up, I felt conflicted. I felt torn in two different and opposing directions. You see, as a young person, I loved the natural sciences. I loved all learning, but there was something about that first time that teacher took us to the woods behind the school and gave us an experiment to perform. Learning about the poisonous berries and the edible ones, learning about hypothesis and the scientific method, and all I can tell you was I was hooked. I loved it. I loved hypothesizing something, and what was more exciting than when it was right was when it was wrong, because it meant there was work left to be done and exploration still not completed. But as a young person, as my love of science grew, a conflict began to occur within me. I was born to immigrant parents, and they were of the Muslim faith, but I tell everyone I consider myself a convert. Because for me, a relationship with God and one's spirituality and something so dear and important as religion is not something that could ever be inherited by blood or given by parents. So for me, religious practice and religion was a choice. And in my case, it was not only a choice of studying Islam, but of a lifelong love of studying religion and reading the scriptures that people held dear and taking every opportunity to learn what others practice and what others hold dear and how they connect to what they consider sacred and the values that they hold most high in their lives. I tell you a conflict because much of the society around me said that one day I would have to make a choice. Much of society portrayed science and religion as on a collision course, as two opposing forces that cannot coexist in a human heart and a human mind. I'll never forget the statements the statement of a religious scientist. And someone asked him, how do you practice your religion but still excel in science? His answer shook me to the bone. He said, I keep my religion on one side of my brain and my science on the other. That was his choice, and the Quran that I was exploring valued and honored the choice, the freedom to choose religion, very much as the Constitution that I was studying and learning about granted us all the freedom of religion and choice. I respected his choice, but I immediately recognized that that choice would not sit well with me. I could not live a life of two personalities. I could not be one person in the mosque or the church or the synagogue or the temple and another person in the laboratory, or one person in the spotlight and a different person at home. The system of values that I desired for myself had to be consistent, had to build one worthwhile human being struggling to be virtuous and to be tied to values, whatever the circumstance and environment. I kept studying and I kept learning. I kept probing and exploring. And I began to learn patience. Because if the great minds before us and the great learners before us took years and decades to probe questions, many of which they left unanswered when they entered their graves and passed on to later generations, I did not want to be in haste for a cheap answer. I didn't want the rush to have an answer tonight lead me to something that was less than the best for myself, for my community, for my family, and for me to share with others. So I continued to probe in the Quran, and I continued to advance in my studies. Then, one day, in 6th grade, I learned a lesson that I'll never forget. My 6th grade teacher was a very sweet woman named Miss Jobson. And we were learning, she was our mathematics teacher. And we were learning for the first time about negative numbers. As you can imagine, by 6th grade, that wide-eyed fascination for learning that was with us all when we were infants, well, some of us lose it by 6th grade. And I'm embarrassed to admit, in that math class, it was a fraction of a moment, but something overcame me and I quickly looked at this subject of negative numbers and an arrogance crept into my heart. In a moment, I decreed about a field which great mathematicians of many faiths and many inclinations had devoted their lives to. I, that 6th grade student, decided that this field of study was pointless. So, brashly, I raised my hand, and Miss Jobson paused her moment at the blackboard. I'm dating myself, right? They don't have all the younger kids in the audience like, what's blackboards? I thought they were white with colorful markers. But back in the day when you couldn't write on the board without walking out with chalk on your palms, she put down her piece of chalk and she acknowledged me. I said, Miss Jobson, what is the point of learning about negative numbers? When is the next time we will enter a market and ask for -3 hamburgers to eat? Have you heard the expression, the blind leading the blind? Because our whole classroom erupted in laughter at the brilliant young 6th grade person who had embarrassed the math teacher and shown that what she was teaching was completely pointless. I wish Miss Jobson had yelled at me at that juncture, but she didn't. She smiled, and she had these thin-rimmed glasses with a lanyard that came to the back of her neck. She took her glasses and brought them down to the bridge of her nose, cocked her head down, and looked at me with a huge smile. All I can say, it was the smile at someone who is so ignorant and clueless that they could not appreciate their own lack of knowledge. I say that because Miss Jobson taught me a lesson. She said, negative numbers have many applications. And she started to list them. And fields of mathematics which I had not heard of and did not know of, one after another, which were enabled by what we were learning in the classroom that day. And she continued adding on and on until I wished that she would stop. Because every time she added another, she further confirmed how much I didn't know. I probably turned the color of a tomato that day, and I was very embarrassed in front of many people, but that embarrassment was very valuable. Because it taught me something. It taught me true mastery and true knowledge is not believing that you have disciplined the vastness of what humans explore. It is the appreciation of how much we do not know. As I explored the Quran, I was amazed also to learn what the Quran emphasized about that. I was taken aback at the verse where God Almighty does not address a scholar or the most learned person, does not even address all of humanity today, but all of humanity past, present, and those that are not here yet. And He decrees, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. And you have not been given from knowledge except for very little. As I studied what the scholars, both the scholars of the religious disciplines and the Muslim scholars that pursued expertise in other fields, one of their statements amazed me. They described very much what I felt in that 6th grade classroom. They said, the one who believes he has truly understood has only confirmed the depth of his ignorance. They paralleled and connected me to what I learned last week when I was visiting the University of Arizona. And a professor there in Tucson, when I shared this verse with him, he said, you know, that's incredible, because I know a member of our faculty, the number one thing he looks for in every PhD defense is if the student acknowledges the vastness of what they do not know. If the student's study and their expertise in that sliver of knowledge has showed them how much there is left to master and understand. I think in many ways today's theme is very timely, because technology is an incredibly powerful and fascinating thing. But there is also a negative repercussion that I think technology has had on our learning today. And I don't mean learning technology, but I mean the type of technology that makes you expect everything now, this instant. That makes you desire a pill for every ill, an instant gratification. Because at the end of the day, there is no shortcut for knowledge. Well, until somebody comes up with my most desired invention, which is a USB port into the brain, where it can download books and not have to study for exams. But until that piece of technology comes out, then we are still wedded to what generations did before us, to a need to build and learn from the experts that came before us, a need to probe and read and examine more than once. In fact, one of the amazing things in my study and journey with the Holy Quran was to learn that linguistically, the word Quran actually means that which is repeatedly recited. Because as anyone will know who has interacted with any of the sacred scriptures, what it says to you on the second time is different from what it says to you on the first time. Because you are changing, you are growing between those two readings. And what it says to you, if you are present in that reading, if you are mentally and spiritually invested in that interaction, then what it says to you is different than what it says to your neighbor. Certainly there are values that touch us all, things that we all share, but there are things that make us unique. And experience is the best teacher of all. That experience that will make you interact differently from what you learn, with what you learn, depending on where you are that moment in your life and your experience. I want to share with you a story that shook me. This is one of my favorite stories of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And as I continued to grow, I interacted with this story, again conflicted between advancement in the sciences, in the arts, in what many call the secular disciplines, and learning religion, or what many would call the sacred disciplines of knowledge. But in the midst of that journey, I came across a tradition of the Prophet Muhammad wherein his wife, Aisha, the mother of the believers, as we call her, honoring her great stature and her great place in history as a teacher and a learner and a great scholar herself, she was asked a really interesting question. And I think not only the Muslims in the room, but anyone who has read a biography about the Prophet Muhammad or seen a person that holds him as a role model will be really intrigued by this question. Aisha, as his wife, was one of the closest people to him. And so a younger man asked her, "O Aisha, what was the most incredible thing about the Messenger of God?" Meaning Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And this was after his death. Aisha had a beautiful response. She said, "What about the Messenger of God was not incredible? All of his character and conduct were phenomenal. But I'll share with you one night, that stood out." She shared that they were together at home resting, and in the middle of the night, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, spoke to Aisha and he said, "O Aisha, would you give me permission to stand and pray to my Lord for a few hours?" What he meant here was an extra prayer, a voluntary prayer in the middle of the night. Aisha, symbolic of the incredible love that united this household, she said, "I prefer your company to anything else, but I prefer what makes you comfortable to what makes me comfortable." It was a beautiful poetic way, and she was a great scholar of language and poetry, of saying, of course, stand up and pray, but I would never voluntarily give up your company otherwise. She said
he stood up and prayed, and while she observed him, he was overtaken by emotion. And he began to cry. And she described how much that emotion overtook him, because as she described that unit of prayer, she said, he stood and he wept. And then he bowed and he wept. And he stood again and he cried. And then he prostrated on the ground and continued to cry. She could not hear what he was saying, but she saw what he was reciting from the Quran was overtaking him with emotion. He continued until dawn rose, continued praying, and when he finished, he was asked, "What caused you to pray? What caused you to cry?" He shared one of my favorite verses of the Holy Quran. He said, "How can I not cry when on this night these verses were revealed to me?" And he recited, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. Verily, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of the night and the day are signs for those endowed with true intellect and great minds. The verses continue, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. Those that remember God standing, sitting, and lying on their sides. وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And they ponder deeply upon the creation of the heavens and the earth. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا سُبْحَانَكَ فَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Saying, "O our Lord, not for nothing have you created all of this. Glory be to you. How perfect are you, so save us from the penalty of the fire." This was one of the last verses that I memorized in my journey of learning and memorizing the Quran. It is in the chapter entitled Surah Ali Imran. But when I came across it and learned of this story, I was challenged. I was challenged because many around me said that I had to be two people or choose a path. That I had to ultimately be a scientist or be an imam and a religious person. That ultimately that road would fork and I could not carry both with me. But this verse, it shocked me. Because so much of what I had learned taught me that Scripture was afraid of science, and that generally religious people did not honor the sciences and disciplines other than sacred knowledge. But I had here the messenger of God crying about a verse that was all about night and day and sunsets and sunrises and heavens and earth, forests and beaches and oceans, speaking about the human experience and linking it, yes, certainly, to the recognition of God and spirituality, but speaking fundamentally about other flavors of the human experience. These verses shocked me. They caught me off guard. What I was waiting for was a scripture cowering in fear. And what I found was a scripture ready to engage me and my mind and my heart and my experience and my knowledge. I felt a challenge, so I pursued that challenge. I continued to study science, to explore, to learn, but I also continued learning about religion and probing deeper. and reciting the Quran. The Quran challenge, وَقُلْ انظُرُوا مَاذَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Look to what is in the heavens and the earth. Peer around you, and so I did that. And I looked in the Quran, and the Quran kept challenging. 890 plus times when I finally got around to counting them. Those who understand, those who think, those who ponder, those who reflect, those who deeply understand, those who read in between the minds and seek subtle meanings. So many, those endowed with true intellect, in so many ways, I found religion engaging my mind and my experience. You know, history is a funny thing. Originally, when I was thinking about sharing these thoughts with you tonight, I looked to the beautiful work that National Geographic did with 1,001 Inventions. Beautiful movie and book and great work about the great contributions that Muslim scholars have made from everything from algebra to medicine to, yes, the religious sciences and spirituality, to the arts and music. So many things I found. And history is important. Those who do not study history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And those that do not start where the last generation left them start the race behind others. But ultimately, what I wanted to share today, I recognize that tonight is not just a celebration of what's past, but a recognition of how elusive the goal of rejuvenating that education across our divisions of our tongues and our colors, across our heritages and our religions. Tonight is about recognizing several people that have taken courageous steps in advancing that mission and engaging in the collective goal of taking our place in that narrative. I loved what I learned looking at those great sciences and learning that algebra was rooted in the Arabic word al, meaning the article the and jabra, and that it survived with us here in the English etymology as well. Or seeing that diagram of that human body and their idea of what anatomy was in that time, or looking at the astrolabe and how they navigated the seas, and how the Renaissance built not only upon what those medieval Muslim scholars had built, but perhaps even more importantly, appreciated their serving as a bridge from the Greek sciences through the Muslim medieval scholars to the Renaissance and now to us. Whereas much of that great Greek and Roman work would not have survived the loss of cities and empires had it not been translated into Arabic and then eventually into Italian and the European languages, and here in English for most of us to access. I do not belittle all of that, and I'm glad I got to share with you a taste of it today. But I did not want to share with you a destination tonight, but a stop along a journey. And the best way I knew how to share that was not to share scholars that had succeeded in the past, but to share a very frail, young, struggling person looking for that path, much as many of us are looking for it together tonight. That path takes me to today, to being energized and honored being with you, learning about how others are pursuing the missions that they hold dear, making the world just a little bit that much better through their efforts, cross-pollinating ideas, and connecting wherever we can, sharing problems and struggles, and learning from one another, learning perhaps more from our failures and struggles than from our successes. Because, as we have in the Islamic tradition and perhaps across the academy and across all circles of knowledge, that every apparent easy success, every person of eloquent words or a great mind or a great teaching ability was not built, except that behind her and behind him are thousands of mistakes and errors, learning at the hands of teachers and the courage to get back up and try again. I remember the day that I was slated to give my first Oak Tree class. And as Maryam was sharing with you earlier, Oak Tree is a professional education institute targeted very much at teaching people that will not specialize in the religious sciences, but that are professionals and want to share their religion and identity with others. And I was still stuck in those divisions, the sacred and the secular. But then one evening, speaking to a chaplain, as I was getting ready to teach Faith 101, if you will, how to build the Islamic creed and how to build one's identity as a Muslim, that chaplain looked across the couch at me and he said, "Muhammad, others, other imams, other teachers will teach this, and it is a valuable thing to teach. But what we really need is someone to teach how to build faith when it is challenged, how to find identity growing up," as we were learning from the beautiful children's book stand outside, how to build solid identity growing up when you are stereotyped, when you are shoved in a bucket, when some people take what Islam and Muslims are, a small minority of extremists, and paint a picture that does not represent those in this room. He said, "That's your calling." I pursued that calling, and I kept treading that line between the religious sciences and between the other human disciplines and knowledge. And so many people today, so many of our awardees, and just look around you, the very fabric of this room and the differences amongst us are built out of the courage to cross those barriers and to extend a hand and reach out to someone and build on that commonality. So I want to share with you something that journey taught me. I began with that infant that opened their eyes wide, exploring that new world and amazed at their first ability to see. But I want to close with a group of people, about a handful, 5 people in their 50s. We were sitting in the shade of the Kaaba in the season of the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. And these group of people were of Turkish descent. None of us in either party spoke the language of another. But we had in front of us a composition book. And on it was drawn a makeshift map of the world. When we would meet another person, we would say, "We're from America, right here. Where are you from?" And through that writing and stuttering, maybe saying a few words in their language if we had it, We connected with others. But these Turkish men, their hands were worn and calloused. Their clothes were simple. They had the appearance of people that had not had access to education from a very early age, out of working in the fields and trying to find an honorable living for themselves and their families. So what shocked me was not a couple minutes into the conversation when they pointed out Turkey on the map after much discussion, but when they looked at that composition book and opened their eyes in a way that I can only liken to a young infant child examining the world for the first time. And they said, "That's the whole world?" It struck me that these men had never seen an atlas, never seen a map of the world, never seen the vastness of earth captured on a sheet of paper. And indeed, what we're gathered today for is to ensure that infant child and that young girl in elementary school and that group of students huddled over their college textbooks and those elderly people that may not have had the access to the education that many of us were blessed with, what we're gathered here for is to take our place in the legacy of enabling change for education to happen for the others. And my invitation to you tonight is to honor the great scholars of all faiths that have advanced all human knowledge and disciplines in the past, to join me and join the Muslim Coalition of Connecticut in honoring and celebrating the accomplishments of the awardees tonight that have advanced the enablement of education through their own ways. But most importantly, not for a soul in this room to walk out those doors at the back of the room until you've made the connections and prepared the intention and the conviction and charted just the next step in the path of how you will contribute to enabling change for education and access to all, and especially here in Connecticut. Thank you so much for the honor of being with you tonight, and it's really an honor and a blessing. I look forward to meeting more of you after the event. Wassalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.